He had barely finished dragging the alien pilot from the wreckage when she latched onto him with the enthusiasm of a spider on a caffeine binge. Her limbs were everywhere at once, an awkward combination of flailing arms, suction-cupped feet, and something that looked suspiciously like a prehensile tail wrapping around his waist. He stumbled backward, nearly falling into the shallow ditch beside the crashed ship, and she squeaked excitedly, apparently interpreting this as a game. "Anchor! Must remain anchored!" she shouted in a sing-song tone, her voice a strange mixture of purring and metallic clanks that vibrated against his chest. He patted her awkwardly, trying to keep her from toppling him over entirely, muttering, "I'm fine. I can handle this, bonding procedure?" He had no idea why he added that last part. Somehow it sounded right. She didn't let go. Not for a second. Her alien eyes, huge and luminous, blinked rapidly as if scanning every detail of him, memorizing his face, his smell, the way his shirt clung to his torso after the exertion of the rescue. Every time he tried to step back, she would spring forward with the surprising agility of a creature half his size but 10 times as determined. He tried setting her down gently, but she would hop right back into his arms, wrapping around his neck or pressing her forehead to his chest, murmuring something in her own language that sounded suspiciously like a lullaby, though she wasn't small or cute in the traditional sense. Her body shimmered with faint bioluminescent patterns that pulsed every time she got excited, which was frequently. By the time they reached the edge of the crash site, he was practically carrying her like a backpack made of living alien energy. People who happened to be walking by stared in disbelief, and he waved at them helplessly while she clung tightly. "I am bonded! Must remain bonded!" she repeated, bouncing slightly in his arms as if the concept of personal space didn't exist in her species' vocabulary. He grunted, trying to keep his balance, and felt something sticky on his shoulder. "What's that?" he asked, swiping at the residue. She giggled, or whatever the alien equivalent of giggling was, before pressing her face closer to his neck, apparently considering it a mark of honor. Her clinginess didn't stop at the physical. As they moved toward his vehicle, she began analyzing him like a walking checklist. She tapped his pockets, sniffed his jacket, and muttered cryptically about life force storage and nutrient containment. When he asked her what she meant, she tilted her head, blinking those enormous eyes, and said, "You must teach me Earth survival rituals. Eating, sleeping, bonding. Must synchronize." He interpreted this as an invitation to eat together, which seemed innocent enough, until she insisted on arranging his meal so that their bites would be perfectly mirrored, hands hovering awkwardly over each other's plates, attempting an alien version of synchronized snacking. He was trying to negotiate a little breathing room when she suddenly floated a few inches off the ground, courtesy of what he later learned were anti-gravity boots, and wrapped herself entirely around him midair. He stumbled backward into the car, legs flailing like a marionette with tangled strings. The car horn blared, causing her to shriek in delight, gripping him tighter. Passers-by stopped to stare, some whispering, some laughing, and he felt the simultaneous thrill and terror of being both a hero and a spectacle. She had a habit of misinterpreting every phrase he said. "Take a break," he suggested weakly, hoping she might release him for a moment. She blinked, nodded, and immediately flopped onto his chest, wrapping her arms around his neck as if they were going to nap together. "Yes, must rest together. Bonding critical." He sighed, realizing that no amount of logical explanation would convince her otherwise. She was fully committed, and apparently, he was now a part of her very survival protocol. Despite the chaos, there was something unexpectedly charming about her clinginess. The way her hands carefully adjusted his clothing, or how she seemed genuinely concerned when he brushed against the thorn bush, suggested that beneath the hyperactive, overzealous attachment, there was a creature who valued him more than anything else. He caught himself smiling despite the absurdity, imagining the stories he would never dare tell anyone without them thinking he'd lost his mind. The sun was dipping below the horizon when he finally managed to reach his apartment. He set her down carefully, thinking maybe now she would settle into a corner or on the couch. She immediately floated to his shoulder, perched there like some alien parrot, and whispered, "Anchor secure." Human safe. Bonding continues. He rubbed his temples, muttering something about never signing up for this level of responsibility, and yet couldn't stop the small grin forming on his face. Somewhere in the back of his mind, amid the panic and the ridiculousness, he realized he might actually be looking forward to what came next. And so, the human and the alien pilot settled into the first night of their unintended partnership. She remained relentlessly attached, shimmering bioluminescent patterns illuminating the small apartment, humming softly while keeping a protective arm wrapped around him. Every small movement he made was met with an immediate response, a hovering embrace, a curious tilt of her head, a soft murmur in her own language. It was overwhelming, ridiculous, and strangely comforting. He could already tell that life with her would never be quiet or predictable, and maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what he needed. Her eyes glowed brighter, reflecting the tiny lights in the apartment, and she murmured, "Tomorrow, bonding training begins. Must synchronize everything." He groaned softly but didn't push her away. Somehow, amid the chaos, the clinginess, the constant hovering, he felt a flicker of anticipation. Whatever this alien pilot had in mind, he was trapped, willingly, unreasonably, and inexplicably enchanted. The next morning began with a gentle but inexorable assault on his senses. He woke to a soft humming and a faint glow brushing across the room. Before he could even open his eyes fully, she was there, hovering inches above his chest, bioluminescent patterns pulsing rapidly as if excited beyond comprehension. "Bonding training begins," she announced cheerfully, her voice a strange mixture of metallic resonance and high-pitched trill. He groaned, stretching lazily, hoping maybe a few minutes of peace would be allowed before her relentless energy surged through the apartment. No such luck. The first exercise was zero-gravity cuddling, which, in theory, sounded manageable. In practice, it involved her floating above him, trying to press her body against his at awkward angles while he stumbled over the bed, arms flailing in an effort to maintain balance. Every time he tried to gently move her away, she would wrap an arm around his neck and a leg around his waist, murmuring, "Anchor must remain secure." One miscalculated push sent them both spinning in a slow arc, crashing into the dresser with a series of thumps and clatters. He found himself laughing despite himself, realizing that he had never experienced a wake-up routine so completely absurd. After disentangling themselves, she insisted on synchronized snacking. Plates of toast and scrambled eggs were laid out in precise alignment, and he was forced to mimic every bite she took. If he even looked away for a second, she would glare with her large, glowing eyes, fluttering them rapidly as if to say, "How dare you break synchronization?" The entire exercise felt like a bizarre mix of culinary drill sergeant and alien courtship ritual, and yet, watching her try so seriously to mirror his every bite was endearing in its own way. He could feel himself softening to her earnestness, despite the mess of crumbs scattered across the table, and the occasional hissing from her mouth when she misjudged a particularly difficult bite. No bonding session was complete without the competitive burping contest. He hadn't realized it was a bonding ritual in her species, but apparently it was critical to mutual respect. She demonstrated first, producing a low, vibrating sound that seemed physically impossible. He tried to respond in kind, producing something pitifully human in comparison, and she tilted her head, eyes glowing brighter in silent judgment. "Insufficient," she stated flatly. "Must achieve resonance." He winced as she leaned closer, attempting to coach him with a mix of hand gestures and what could only be described as interpretive burping movements. By the end of the contest, his stomach hurt, his dignity was in shambles, and she looked pleased beyond measure. The entire day passed in a series of escalating exercises. She dragged him into absurdly complicated stretches, insisting they mirror each other perfectly, and made him participate in her alien version of meditation, which involved hovering slightly above the floor while reciting phrases in her strange tongue. Every failed attempt was met with a cheerful correction, her hands gripping his shoulders with surprising strength as she repositioned him mid-air. Even mundane tasks like brushing teeth became synchronized rituals, and he could feel the subtle sexual tension creeping in, particularly when her glowing eyes lingered just a little too long on his expression, or when her hands brushed his in the process of adjusting his posture. Public spaces were no refuge either. She decided that their bonding training should extend beyond the apartment. Trips to the grocery store became exercises in subtle chaos, synchronized cart pushing, careful mirroring of movements through aisles, and the occasional attempt to taste test everything in perfect unison. Other shoppers gave confused or horrified looks, but she seemed entirely oblivious, humming happily as he tried to keep up, negotiating the sticky balance between keeping her safe and avoiding social disaster. She also had a habit of misinterpreting common objects for alien bonding tools. A bottle of soda became a ceremonial elixir, a loaf of bread transformed into a prop for some ritualistic display. He had learned to nod politely and follow along, realizing that resistance was not only futile but also highly entertaining for her. The adult tension simmered subtly throughout all of this. Every accidental brush of her hand, every moment he had to steady her while she hovered against him, and every synchronized action created a strange intimacy. He found himself noticing her subtle quirks, the soft glow of her skin when excited, the way her antennae twitched when she was concentrating, and the almost human way her large eyes could communicate amusement or frustration. He was completely caught in the ridiculous gravity of her clinginess, and yet, the absurdity was undeniably charming. By evening, he was exhausted but oddly exhilarated. She flopped dramatically onto the couch beside him, still humming her strange bonding lullaby, tail curled loosely around his arm. "Day 1 complete," she declared proudly. "Anchor secure. Human synchronized. Bonding metrics satisfactory." He laughed, leaning back into the cushions, trying to process the sheer intensity of the day. Somehow, he had survived her relentless energy, ridiculous rituals, and comically strict interpretations of bonding exercises, and unexpectedly, he was looking forward to the next round. She nudged his shoulder gently with her head, eyes glowing softly, and murmured, "Tomorrow, more synchronization. Must achieve full resonance." He groaned but couldn't suppress a small smile. It was impossible to resist her sheer enthusiasm, her absurd insistence on constant closeness, and the way her clinginess, ridiculous though it was, somehow made him feel needed, noticed, and, against all odds, alive in a way he hadn't felt before. He didn't know what the next day would bring, but he knew one thing for certain: life with this alien pilot was going to be chaotic, hilarious, and strangely irresistible. The next morning started with a minor disaster, though he wouldn't realize it at first. He had barely gotten out of bed when the apartment's small fusion heater began hissing ominously, sparks flicking along its edges. He frowned, stepping closer to inspect it, but before he could even lift a finger, she was on him like a living shadow, wrapping arms and legs around him in an instant. "Danger detected," she announced, eyes glowing brighter than ever, scanning the device with alarming precision. He tried to pull away, but the more he struggled, the tighter her cling became, as if her body alone could somehow neutralize the threat. She floated slightly above the floor, hands pressing against the heater with a strange, shimmering energy that made his hair stand on end. "What are you doing?" he yelled, half in panic, half in awe, as sparks began to dance along the edges. She gave a tiny chirp, her voice almost musical, and whispered, "Stabilizing. Must protect anchor." The heater fizzled and sparked one last time before settling into silence, its panels glowing gently. He staggered back, mouth open, unable to form words as she hovered above him, wings, or whatever those semi-transparent appendages were, fluttering lightly as if she were a butterfly celebrating victory. His heart pounded, partly from the adrenaline, partly from the fact that he couldn't deny the strange thrill of her presence, even when it clung to him in ways no human had ever dared. The accidental heroics didn't stop there. Later that day, they walked into town to pick up supplies, and a small commotion erupted near the market square. A loose cargo drone had gone haywire, spinning wildly through the streets, threatening pedestrians and cars alike. He froze in indecision, unsure how to stop it without causing more chaos, when she immediately sprang into action. With a combination of levitation, rapid movements, and what looked like a mix of acrobatics and sheer instinct, she maneuvered around the spinning drone, nudging it gently with precise touches until it came to a safe, albeit slightly dented, halt. He could only gape, mouth hanging open as onlookers clapped and cheered, utterly unaware of the chaos that had narrowly been prevented. She landed back in front of him, chest heaving, tail flicking like a metronome. Anchor safe. Humans protected. Bonding successful, she declared with utter seriousness, eyes flickering with pride. He rubbed his temples, trying to reconcile the absurdity of it all, a hyper-clingy alien pilot, simultaneously a walking disaster magnet and a hero of the day, standing before him with glowing skin and an expression of earnest satisfaction. He wanted to scold her, to tell her that she could have let him do something for once, but the way she looked at him, bright-eyed and triumphant, made the words stick in his throat. It wasn't just heroics that intensified the connection between them, it was the closeness that accompanied it. Every time she saved him from danger, every time her alien instincts activated, she clung even tighter afterward, pressing herself against him in a way that made his pulse accelerate. There was a strange intimacy in it, an almost magnetic pull that no human hand or mind could replicate. When she adjusted his sleeve, brushing her glowing fingers over his arm while murmuring advice in her alien tongue, he could feel the tension in his body unwind in ways he hadn't realized were possible. Each accidental touch, each enforced proximity, each absurdly intimate rescue contributed to an escalating sense of both comfort and desire. By mid-afternoon, a minor structural collapse occurred at the construction site near the square, sending debris tumbling dangerously close to a group of workers. He panicked, unsure how to act, but she reacted instinctively. In a blur of motion, she hovered, extended her arms in a makeshift barrier, and somehow used her alien physiology to absorb the impact, deflecting chunks of falling concrete and sending workers scrambling to safety. He watched in awe, frozen by both terror and fascination, realizing for the first time that her clinginess was not a weakness. It was a manifestation of her instinct to protect those she had bonded with. Even he, human though he was, had become part of that protective circle, and the realization made his chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with fear. After the chaos had settled, they walked back toward his apartment, her body still attached like a luminous shadow. He tried to protest gently, suggesting maybe she could hover ahead for a moment to give him space, but she simply entwined herself with his arm, her voice soft and melodic as she said, "Must remain anchor. Must observe human resilience. Must bond." He laughed, exhausted, rubbing her back absent-mindedly, and found himself thinking that he didn't want her to let go, not really. There was a ridiculous comfort in her constant closeness, a mix of absurdity, danger, and intimacy that made even mundane moments feel extraordinary. Even the mundane moments after the heroics were tinged with adult comedy. She insisted on synchronizing their breathing as part of a cool-down ritual, hovering above him and mirroring each inhalation and exhalation with a strange rhythmic precision. He attempted to mimic her, accidentally knocking over a floor lamp in the process, and she reacted with alarm, fluttering toward him and grabbing his shoulders mid-fall. "Anchor unsafe!" she exclaimed. He collapsed onto the couch, laughing uncontrollably as she clung to him, and realized that the sheer ridiculousness of the day was part of what made her endearing. By nightfall, he found himself leaning against the wall, breathing heavily, while she hovered nearby, occasionally adjusting his tie, brushing crumbs from his jacket, or simply wrapping her arms around him in a protective embrace. He could feel the subtle pulse of her excitement through her glowing skin, the soft warmth of her proximity, and the undeniable pull of both desire and affection. Her clinginess, her insistence on constant physical and emotional proximity, had shifted from being a source of frustration to a strange kind of solace. For the first time since the crash, he felt anchored in a way he hadn't anticipated, even amidst chaos and absurdity. As they finally settled in for the evening, she nestled against him, tail coiled gently around his arm, humming softly in her alien tongue. He realized, with a mixture of disbelief and reluctant admiration, that she had saved more than just his physical well-being today. She had rescued him from his monotony, from his self-imposed routines, and from the notion that life could be entirely predictable. And as her glowing eyes met his, bright and earnest, He couldn't deny the truth. The clingy alien pilot was not just a source of chaos, she was a partner in every sense of the word, and the thought made his pulse race in more ways than one. By morning, the apartment was already a chaotic hive of alien energy. He awoke to the faint glow of her skin brushing across the ceiling like an ethereal nightlight, and a low hum vibrating in his chest, announcing that she had been awake for hours preparing what she called full bonding synchronization. He groaned, rubbing his eyes, only to find her perched at the edge of the bed, tail curling around his arm, large eyes blinking impatiently. Anchor must rise. Day begins. Must continue bonding, she said, her voice a mixture of command and gentle coaxing. He rolled over reluctantly, realizing immediately that resistance was useless. She clung to him as he tried to stretch, adjust his posture, and even reach for a cup of water, weaving her limbs around him like a living, glowing restraint. Breakfast became another comedy of errors. She insisted on creating a perfect mirrored spread, 2 cups of coffee, 2 plates of eggs, toast, and fruit arranged with mathematical precision. Every bite had to be synchronized, every sip coordinated, and the tiniest deviation was met with a dramatic flick of her antennae and a mild squeal of disapproval. He attempted to argue, but she hovered close, hand on his shoulder, murmuring, "Anchor must comply. Synchronization ensures survival." By the time they finished, he had eggs in his hair, juice on his shirt, and an unshakable grin on his face. Despite the mess and the ridiculousness, he was beginning to accept that he enjoyed every absurd second of it. Mid-morning brought the usual small-scale disasters, but this time, she insisted on practicing their bonding in the field. A minor tech malfunction at a nearby lab sent sparks flying from a diagnostic terminal, causing a small electrical fire. He froze, unsure how to handle it, when she immediately swooped in, arms extended, tail flicking, glowing skin illuminating the scene as she absorbed the heat and redirected the sparks harmlessly into the air. Her movements were precise and unhesitating, each motion blending instinct with bizarrely elegant alien grace. He was stunned, watching her glide effortlessly across danger, and realized, not for the first time, that her clinginess was inseparable from her heroism. Each embrace, each touch, was a protective instinct, and being near her was safer than anything else he'd ever experienced. After the crisis passed, she insisted on a cool-down ritual, which, naturally, involved hovering slightly above him while performing intricate gestures meant to align energy signatures. His attempts to imitate her were clumsy at best. He flailed, bumped into a railing, and nearly knocked himself over, only for her to catch him with an embrace so tight and perfectly timed that he ended up lying against her glowing torso, heart racing from a combination of exertion and inexplicable desire. Her soft humming filled the space, vibrating gently against his chest, and he felt a strange warmth spread through him. Somewhere between exhaustion, embarrassment, and fascination, he realized that he didn't want her to stop clinging, not ever. By mid-afternoon, their bonding exercises had spilled into public spaces again, each more ridiculous than the last. She insisted on synchronized shopping, coordinated traffic crossing drills, and even public demonstrations of mirrored human-alien respiration, which involved hovering slightly above him, hands gently pressed to his shoulders, and matching every breath he took. Passers-by gawked, some laughed, and a few whispered about how strange the city had become. He ignored them all, feeling a strange pride swell in his chest. She clung to him so completely, so undeniably, that even the chaotic, absurd nature of their interactions felt deeply intimate. He found himself laughing at her quirks, secretly enjoying the attention, and for the first time, letting himself feel something electric beneath the surface of absurdity. Evening brought a minor crisis of her own invention. She had misread a municipal signal as a threat, sending herself into overdrive with glowing patterns intensifying, limbs flailing, and tail lashing like a whip. He tried to calm her, hands on her shoulders, speaking soothingly, but she interpreted it as a ritual challenge and clung to him even tighter, humming and chirping in her alien language. Somehow, through a combination of instinct, intuition, and sheer chaotic energy, she neutralized the threat, which turned out to be nothing more than a misfiring street lamp. By the time the city returned to normal, he was exhausted, hair disheveled, clothes smudged with dust, but laughing harder than he had in years. Finally, back in the apartment, she curled around him, tail draping over his chest, arms entwined in a gentle but firm embrace. Her glowing eyes flickered in time with her humming, and he felt an odd, warming pulse of contentment. Anchor secured. Bonding successful. Love metrics improving, she murmured. He shook his head, smiling, realizing he had been drawn into a partnership completely unlike anything he could have imagined. She was relentless, chaotic, overbearing, but also brilliant, protective, and somehow, impossibly affectionate. He leaned back against the cushions, letting her cling freely, the glow of her body casting gentle light across the room. Every touch, every brush of her hand, every accidental collision as she shifted closer brought a spark of electricity he hadn't known he needed. The absurdity of their day, the synchronized snacks, zero-gravity cuddles, public spectacles, and heroic interventions, had built a strange intimacy that was impossible to deny. He realized that her relentless presence, once overwhelming, had become comforting, even thrilling. As she hummed herself to rest, still partially wrapped around him, he couldn't help but smile. She had rescued him, yes, but in clinging to him so completely, she had transformed his life into something unpredictable, hilarious, and strangely beautiful. There was no going back to ordinary existence. He had been swept into a whirlwind of alien energy, reckless affection, and accidental heroics. And as he drifted off to sleep, her bioluminescent glow dimming softly around them, he realized that he wouldn't want it any other way. Whatever chaos tomorrow might bring, he was ready to face it, clinging alien pilot and all.